Good evening, everybody. Miss Deborah, hello. Happy Tuesday. Let's get some ambiance going on in here. How are you doing today, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me for this. Technically, it's an impromptu book reading because it was supposed to be yesterday, but the weather thwarted that. So today's a reschedule. Michelle, thank you so much. Thank you. Hello, coffee dealer. It goes well. How about you? All right. There we go. We'll get a little bit of music playing for just a little bit to give our audience a chance to log on and get comfy as we get started on our final book of the series. I'm so excited. I cannot wait. Home and out of the cold. Good. Good. I've been home and out of the cold all day because we canceled work today. So I got a snow day. My inner elementary school child screamed with glee. So oh. Put that chat away. Can you guys hear the music okay? It's not going to be on for very long, but you know, I figure why not have a little something on in the background while we wait for people to join us. Markets were open, therefore, well, you know, as long as you were able to get home or get to work and get home safely, that's all that matters. I think the biggest thing around here for us was the issue with the ice, because we got snow, definitely more than I thought we were going to get. I think we ended up getting like 4 inches, but it was really the ice underneath everything that was just, it was awful. I am currently in the Northern Virginia area, so that band of snow that came through yesterday ended up hitting us kind of head on in a way, so we definitely got a lot more snow than I think we were originally anticipating, but oh, in Philly. Okay, so I mean, you know, you got it too. So for anyone who is not normally a part of our book reading series, we usually wait till about 5 after for people to get logged in and to get settled in and comfy before we start reading, and we'll go for about an hour. Typically that's about as long as my eyes can take at the end of a day, so we'll probably read until about 9 o'clock or maybe a little bit later. So we're reading the Kishara series by Amelia Atwater. I don't know if you can see it at the top, but Amelia Atwater Rhodes. This is the final book. So there are 5 books in this series. And if you have missed them, or have missed some of them, or you just want to go back and re-listen to them, you can actually find all of the other readings that I've done of these books on my YouTube channel. So if you just go to my bio here in TikTok and just hit the YouTube button, it'll take you through and it'll put you on the playlist. It'll help you find the playlist of all of these books. What's it about? That is kind of a long-winded question, long-winded answer. I have heard people try and describe this as kind of a Romeo and Juliet series, if Romeo and Juliet had not died. And I don't necessarily like that comparison because it's really, there's like magic and different like hybrid races involved, and but it is, at its core, it's basically about these two groups of people, primarily the Avians and the Serpient people, and how they have been at war for, centuries, and kind of no one really knew why. But then as the story unfolds, you find out like the backstory to like what started everything, and a lot of key players come to the surface, and it is kind of in a way like a Romeo and Juliet, like a them versus us kind of story, but it's about also bridging gaps. It's about coming to understand your adversary and realizing that maybe you're not as different as you originally thought. So it's a very good series. As you can see, these books are not very big. So D&D meets Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, I guess that's a good, with Last Samurai. Yeah, okay. Yeah, actually a lot of that could be very applicable. So if anyone's familiar with D&D and Romeo and Juliet and The Last Samurai, if you've read this series, that actually is pretty, that's actually pretty spot on. Thank you. But again, if you're not really big into like thick books, these books, like, look, they're, for comparison, my finger, like this book is like thinner than the width of my finger. So they're very easy reads. They're very light reads. So I highly encourage anyone, if you want to get back into reading and you don't want to, you don't want Lord of the Rings to be your very first trip back into reading, pick this series up. It's a good series. It's engaging without being too terribly, cerebral. So, Satan's Petting Zoo. Who's the author of that? Lisa Nichols, Abundance Now. Okay. Because once this book is done, this will complete the series, and so I'm actually kind of looking at either my current library at home to see what we dive into next. And I've also been encouraging my viewers to send me any suggestions about book series that they may want me to take a look at, so we can dive into those maybe next, or whatever whatever I end up picking to read next. But yeah, this has been a good read, a good series. I found it in high school, and I really liked it, and then forgot about it like for years and years and years. And then I was cleaning out, we were moving, and I found these books, and I was like, oh, I should start reading these to my followers, because I think this would be a fun series to read. Brian Kosinski and Chris Pisano. Okay, all right. I'll check both of those books out, because I'm always looking for new books to add to my repertoire. So what time is it? It's okay. So it's a little after 8:05. So we're gonna get started reading. For anybody who has this book, we are starting fresh, so strap in, everybody. All right. Prologue. Who am I? Lately, I have wondered this, as I've struggled to discover my place in the world in which I find myself. Mongrel, exile, stranger, I have always been tolerated wherever I've been, but I have never been welcomed. I have never been welcomed except by Ekel, the void darkness. And what does that mean? To be wanted by nothing. My father was Ange Cobriana, a Serpient prince, the heir to the Cobra throne. He was loved by his people and his family, though it has been 25 years since Ange's death at the hands of the Hawk Prince, Javier Chardet. My father's followers will say his name with reverence. They looked to me, as his only child, with respect, even though I never knew him. My father was killed within days of my conception. My mother was the falcon Ladarian Jaes Oisna Ona Saniet. Darien was young and she was powerful. She swore her service to the Empress Sharza when she was still a child. Years later, she conceived me during Anjay's visit to our falcon land. The trauma of his death triggered in her a vision of events the Empress had long before struggled to hide: the creation of the ancient Avian-Serpient War. Darien stayed quiet for the months before my birth, but once I was no longer dependent on her mothering body, she began her treason, which culminated in an attempt to kill the Empress's heir, the Lady Araceli. That was the last time my mother bothered to care for her child. I was raised a mongrel in the beautiful white land of Anmik. I was a flaw in the center of an otherwise priceless diamond. The Empress herself took a hand in my upbringing. She alone showed me tenderness during my childhood. My earliest memory is of my Empress holding me after my magic overwhelmed me and filled my mind with images no child should ever see. My memory is of pain and blood, and of my Empress's gentle arms, and the sadness in her eyes when I burned my voice away with my screams. After that day, Sharza allowed me to grow the wings of my demi-form so that I could take to the sky. She taught me to dance, and for a few brief years, I was a child. I ran with the dreams of others, laughing with the spirits of the past and the future that always walked the roads of the White City, invisible to most, but never to me. I made friends with those who did not exist, with those who might never exist, and with those who had died millennia before. Miss Eileen Francis, hello, how are you, dear? I remember one woman who most frequently filled my constant waking dreams. Though born of mixed blood, she had learned to control her power. I wanted so badly to know her, to be her, but like all my ghosts, she never looked at me. Sometimes when I danced, I could feel my Empress watching. She was one of the very few people who were fully real to me. When she smiled, I felt Anmik's magic shimmer with pleasure, as if I had been granted a gift by the divine. Then came the day when Anmik Famela, Anmik, help me. Grant me your black peace. Do not make me think of that day. I can speak for ages about the lives, the hopes and fears of others. Please keep me from my own nightmares. I can speak of the Dasi, the ancient coven from which the falcons and the serpient both come. I can almost feel the hot sand of the Egyptian desert beneath my feet and smell the Nile. I can see their altars. I can see them dance and pray. I was lost in the darkness of Ekel for so long, and I was content there, until a guard sworn to my father's line, a guard with royal falcon blood I could not ignore, called to me. Duty compelled Nisias to try to pull me from my void, but it is hard to say exactly what compelled me to return. And now, here I am, a mongrel in a land of mongrels, and yet still an outsider. All I have from my mother is a broken falcon form I cannot call upon, and all I have from my father is cursed blood, and a black onyx signet ring to symbolize the family that I've no desire for. She Kahena, we are not. Oshe Kahena, Ashe Kahena. We never were, we never shall be. We return to the void we never left, for Mehe is the center of all, and all is the center of nothing. Em Ekel Dahai. Chapter 1. Please don't fall. Fire. Serpient, who held to the old myths, believed that the world began in fire. Out of the numb void came passion and heat, and will too strong to be denied. Order and chaos, Anmik and Anamirak, began their eternal dance, and from the embers of their battle, the world was born. So perhaps it was not surprising that the world would end of that same heat. I was pulled from my musings as the door opened, drawing my attention to the small two-room building in which I had been sitting cross-legged before the hearth, perhaps for several hours. I looked up as a trio of falcons entered the candle shop, their steps uncharacteristically light and their expressions unguarded. Han la ni auna, pata ratshatoth rakvua pate dient. Cobras change kings, Spark observed with some amusement as easily as the white lady's air changed lovers. The 4 falcons who frequented this shop at the edge of the avian hills of Wyvern's Court were in hiding, criminals who would probably be executed if they ever showed themselves in the White City again. Though Spark, Maya, Opal, and Gren disguised themselves as simple avian merchants in the public areas of Wyvern's Court, here they switched back to the falcon language, Hadassi. I enjoyed hearing the language of my home, even spoken by these exiles. Some of the serpents of Wyvern's Court tried to use it, but Hadassi has always sounded stunted and twisted to me when it came from the tongue of a snake. Opal emerged from the back room, his eyes heavy-lidded from sleep. Without sparing a glance at me, he asked, "Heish Henna? What happened?" Gren, the owner of the candle shop, answered in the same language. "Oliza Charday Cobriana," he announced, "has just abdicated the throne of Wyvern's Court. She and some wolf have run off in the woods together, leaving Salem and Sive holding the bag." The words stole my breath, not because they shocked me, but because they left me with a powerful sense of déjà vu. Months before, I had seen a vision of the Wyvern princess dethroned. The image had been unclear, and all I had been able to do was go to Oliza and warn her, "You are about to do something that changes everything." I had hoped to make her think through her actions. Instead, I had triggered the very events I had sought to avoid. Around me, the falcons continued their conversation. "Changing leaders like autumn leaves is better than letting one rule for 1,000 years, Gren observed. It makes you wonder, though, how easy it might be to put someone on the Serpient throne who would turn this land in a more favorable direction." Maya looked pointedly at me. This was not a new argument, and Opal dismissed it before I even needed to reply. "Makes you wonder, perhaps," he scoffed. "One would think that several days of punishment by the Empress's mercy would have taught you not to speak treason with every word." "The heir gave me to her mercy for conceiving a child," Maya spat. "This was the crime that led her to flee from the Falcon Island. If that is treason, which it is," Opal said, interrupting, "seeing as the Empress forbids Kajais from breeding." Kajais were falcons born without magic, freaks in a city whose inhabitants breathed power and worked spells as if they were weaving baskets. But Unmeek's magic was poison to new life. The royal house had had only one child in the past 1,000 years, Araceli's son, Sebastian. Kajai's children were conceived more easily. Almost as easily as Quemak, mongrels like Opal, whose father was human, leaving Opal with the stigma of mixed blood in addition to no magic. And of course, me. "If that is treason," Maya said softly, "and is deserving of what I suffered for it, then do you think I fear a cobra's punishments? Besides, I speak only of replacing one cobra with another. It's nothing new for serpents." Sometimes I envied Maya for the fire of her hatred. Though Kajais, and therefore powerless to make any change, she maintained an incredible passion that I was no longer able to feel, no matter how I tried. "Sebastian's child guards the new Serpient King," Opal pointed out. "Nasias sees us all for what we are, and don't think he doesn't watch us carefully. You don't think he would stop you if you tried to—" Maya uttered a curse. "Then we get rid of him, at which point you consign to the Echo the false queen you wish to place on the throne," I said softly, interjecting. This argument was old, and I was bored of it. "But not until I teach you agony, the mercy never dreamed of." Silence crashed down. Unlike these 4, I was not harmless Kajais. I had the full ability to carry out my threat if I chose. "Salem Cobriana is beloved by his people," I said. "The dancers adore him because he is the first in more than 800 years to be raised in the Nest Nursery. He follows their most ancient traditions and knows them all as well as any dancer. He is supported by the previous Dient, by the beloved Princess Oliza, and by the avian Tuuli Thea. Most serpents tolerate me. but only because I do nothing that offends them. That they know of, I added. If they knew I spent my free hours with falcons and the white vipers of the outlaw Obsidian Guild, they would tolerate me far less. Scythe Chardet, on the other hand, can barely stand to be in the room with me. Who cares what the Hawks thinks? Maya asked, challenging me. Everyone who does not wish to return to war, Gren answered for me. I nodded, and as you mentioned, Salem will now be guarded by Nasiah Silvermead. I will kill any who touch the Falcon Prince. That is, if they aren't first killed by either the Wyverns or the Serpient Palace Guard. Maya tossed her head. You're forgetting that you are the rightful heir to the Serpient throne. You are Anjay Cobriana's only daughter. And Salem is his nephew, I said. You are forgetting two very important things. First of all, the Serpient would rebel and dethrone any who dared challenge their beloved king, no matter what my birthright. They would never allow me to take the throne from the one they want there. Again, Maya argued, there are traditionalists among the Serpient who think you should be queen. I have heard them speaking. Whether or not they approve of you specifically, they think that Anjay's daughter, not the son of his younger sister, should take the throne. You are the oldest and the first in line. Blood may not matter to a serpent as much as it does to a falcon, but a cobra's blood still matters. The second and most important thing you are forgetting, I said, ignoring the valid but irrelevant argument, is that I have no desire to be queen. Breathing is a bother to me. Why would I wish to rule? Think what you could accomplish, Maya said, impassioned. Imagine a world where the Serpient followed you. Imagine if you could rally your Nasiahs to our cause, or I could, what? Topple the White Towers, I asked. Survive, Maya, that is all you and I can do. And for some of us, survival takes enough effort. Let it be. If nothing else, Maya said, you would be able to protect those of us who are here. We would be able to live our lives without constantly fearing that the Serpient will discover us and send us away, or that the Empress will remember us and have us dragged back to the island to be put down like feral dogs. If you would not or could not fight on Meek on the island, you could fight the Mercy if they came for us here. The Serpient army wouldn't be able to win if you showed them how to fight a falcon. We're all Kajais. Our children would have no magic. There would be no threat to this realm. As Dient, you could give us a chance to have normal lives. Tears glistened in Maya's eyes, no doubt as she remembered the infant the Mercy had ripped from her the moment it was weaned of its mother's milk. Had my own mother ever cried this way? I thought not. Darien of Anmeek had shown more compassion to these Kajais, whom she had smuggled off the island beneath the veil of her own magic, than she ever had to me, her own misbegotten child. Go to Salem, while he is holding his first child in his arms and feeling how precious it is, I said to Maya, or go to the Tulithea Scythe, when she is first a mother. Tell that monarch your story, and speak your plea. Trust a hawk? Maya replied incredulously. Or a cobra? What would stop them from turning me in? Honor? I suggested. Cobras have no honor. I couldn't help smiling a little, though most wouldn't at that thought. I am Cobra, I answered Maya. Quebec, remember? And the other half of my blood comes from one of the Empress's Mercy. Not a good lineage for a woman you would like to place in power. You're a Gerfalcon, Gren argued, and your mother isn't just one of the Mercy. She is Darien, to whom we all owe our lives. Darien, I said, who tortured your mother, Opal, for her dalliance with a human. Darien, who... People change. They learn, Opal asserted. Darien most of all. She wants to... My mother wants a lot of things, I said. She speaks about a great many dreams as she stands in the White City, by the right hand of the Empress, while we rot in this mongrel land. I tried to turn away, but Maya gripped my hand. Hi, please, try to imagine a world where she cares, Opal spat. Imagine a world where our mongrel cobra has the courage and conviction of her mother. But the Empress long ago wrote that a Quemac child will have cowardice and treason in her blood. The Empress says a lot of things about Quemac, things that may serve her agenda more than the absolute truth, Maya snapped. I tried to pull away, and she held more tightly. Hi, listen to me. Imagine a world where mixed-blood falcons like you aren't automatically branded dangerous traitors. Imagine being able to study your magic, take your wings, and dance. I tore away from her, aware that my garnet eyes were flashing with rare temper. I had that, I said, and it wasn't something my mother gave to me. My Empress raised me, when the woman you praise was otherwise occupied. When my first Sakri made me scream until I lost my voice for days, Sharza bent her own laws and let me grow my wings and dance so I could focus my magic on the present and perhaps not see such horrors again. What did that leniency get us? I lost control, lost my wings, and endangered the woman who had raised me, all because my Quemac arrogance convinced me that I could be more than my Cobra father's mistake. You are, and now here I sit, I continued, in a room full of criminals listening to treason. So tell me, Maya, how was Sharza incorrect? Bitterly, Maya said, You speak very highly of your Empress, yet you are the only one of us who is willingly here in Wyvern's court. If you love the city so much, why don't you go back to it? Give it a rest, Opal said, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder as I turned to leave. Sometimes the Empress is right. People change. Snakes don't. I did not slam the door as I left. There was no need. We had had many arguments about this here, and we would have many more. It was true that I was allowed to return to Anmeek if I chose. Empress Sharza might send someone to carry me, since I did not have my wings of my own anymore. Then I would once again be able to walk in a land where the walls glistened with magic and the roads sang a melody no voice could reproduce. I could live out the rest of my days in a land where even the prison of the mad, the halls of Schmeckel, where I had spent many years, was so beautiful to behold it could bring tears to a mortal's eyes. So, too, could a cuckoo be raised by robins. I loved the White City, but in it I would be that cuckoo, put into the nest by a mother more interested in using me as a political excuse than in nurturing me. If I returned, I would be Darian's pawn to use against my Empress, and that I could not stand. Somehow I always managed to miss my mouth. Chapter 2. I was not the only citizen of Anmeek who had chosen this exile. Nasiah Silvermead was the acknowledged heir of Lady Araceli, who was heir to none other than the Empress herself. Yet the beautiful royal peregrine had chosen to stay in Wyvern's court to serve the now abdicated Wyvern princess Eliza. My loyalty to the Empress Sharza kept me from the White Island, but my connection to Nasias kept me in Wyvern's court, and indeed in this reality. I had languished in my silent madness for years before Nasias found me hiding from the pain of a shattered body and ruined dreams. His vows to the Cobriana line and royal falcon blood helped him pull me from that void, and for that salvation I both loved Nasias and hated him. Anmeek's reluctant prince had given me the world, or as much of it as I could hold. Visions of Anmeek, shards of Wyvern's court, fragments of pasts and futures other than my own. I still felt trapped within Eccles' numbing ice, able to watch others live, but not quite able to feel that life, except sometimes when I beheld Nasias' love for this land and its people. His passion for Wyvern's court drove me now from Gren's candle shop to the marketplace, to see what would happen next. Before I had even descended the northern hills, I could hear shouting. I took another step forward, and suddenly the noise was replaced by absolute silence. I looked over the market that had just been filled with anxious, frightened, and angry avians and serpents, and saw nothing but mist and the pale shimmer of falcon magic. I squeezed my eyes closed, trying to clear the vision from my mind before it could overwhelm me. This time I succeeded in chasing away the Sakri, and I was grateful for that. Too often I became lost in other times and places, especially when I walked through the center of Wyvern's Court. Anamirak's magic swirled so thickly there among the avians and the serpient, it frequently robbed me of any scraps of control I might have had. The shouting returned, and I entered the market. Salem, Cobriana, and Sive Chardet were at the heart of the chaos. Salem, Eliza's only full-blood serpient cousin, had stepped down off a nearby dais and was talking intently with the serpents, who had all but mobbed him. Sive, Eliza's young avian aunt, was struggling to keep some space to herself, but it was a losing battle, one that was obviously making her Alastair Prentice very nervous. Eliza's parents, Zane and Danica, the current Dient and Tuolithea, both looked pale and tired, but they were trying to deal with the shocked crowd. Eliza herself did not seem to be present. Nisias, however, was nearby. He was moving from group to group, sometimes speaking to other guards or breaking up fights, but most often trying to hold the crowd back so they wouldn't completely overwhelm the royal family. Though I would have liked to go to him, I knew better than to attempt to distract him while he was working. I could more easily have swallowed the sea. Instead, I waylaid a serpient I knew, a flautist named Salokin. "What's going on?" The red mamba quickly confirmed what the falcons had told me. Eliza has announced her abdication. His voice was breathy and dazed, and his gaze was unfocused. She stood on that dais, and for the first time he looked at me as he said, "You weren't there. The Dient and the Tuolithea, and Nicola Chardet and Salem and Sive and Prentice were all there. Apparently I do not merit an invitation to royal functions," I said without much shock. As Maya had said, my having cobra blood mattered to the serpient. It did not, however, matter enough to make me family. "But she abdicated. She must have spoken to you about it." "Why would she have?" I asked. I had meddled too much in this drama already, helping Eliza spin a Sakri of her own after mine had foretold her abandonment of the throne. I had not been able to see that second vision, but I imagined that it was what had led to Eliza's abdication. Which one was it? I wondered. I had seen many futures for Wyvern's Court, most of them ending with fire. As Anamirak's magic burned out of control, or with ice, as the falcons wielded on Meek's power and tried to salvage what they could from the wreckage. Salokin's eyes widened. Why would she abdicated? "So you've said, a few times now." "The serpient Arami just stepped down from the throne," he said, as if rewording might make the facts different. "So did the avian heir to the Tuolithea," I was about to say, before I realized what was troubling the mamba. "Salem will rule the serpent well," I assured him. "Salem is very much a dancer." The words, though formed like a compliment, did not sound like one. He was not raised to be king. He wasn't even in line to inherit. How could the Aramea abdicate and not even inform the woman who, if not for falcon treachery, would have been heir in the first place? Falcon treachery. Is that how they're explaining my history these days? My father had never even known I had been conceived. Even if Anjay Cobriana had not been killed within hours of his return to Serpent Land, he would not have been informed of my existence. Had Nisias not spied me in the halls of Schmeckel, Wyvern's Court would have been ignorant still. Some, I supposed, would consider that treachery. After all, according to serpent laws, I should have been my father's heir. I would have to be more than half cobra to be heir to the Serpent throne, I pointed out. Certainly I would have to be less than half falcon, since most serpents still hate and fear my mother's kind. Eliza was only half cobra herself, Salokin said, and she was beloved as Arami, despite the fact that we warred with avians, her mother's people, much more recently than we did with the falcons. I smiled slightly, somewhat amused. Fine, perhaps it was rude, I allowed. But though Eliza and I are cousins, we aren't close. I imagine she had larger things on her mind than the guest list when she planned her abdication. Maybe. My gaze drifted back toward the crowd to where Salem had regained the dais. The cobra reached down to pull a lovely auburn-haired dancer up with him. At first, the dancer's face seemed to be streaked with tears. She was dressed in a gown of dark plum, the serpient color of mourning, and her skin was pale and blotched from weeping. Then the brief vision faded, and she was vibrant and beautiful once more. "Rosalind," Salokin said, when he saw what my attention had turned to. "I imagine she is the one Salem will name Serpent Queen." He shook his head. "He will be a fine king," I said. The words were mostly empty comfort. What did I know of kings? It isn't as if he will be without guidance. The Dient and the Naga are both still alive. I suppose. "Hi!" The anxious voice that cut through our conversation belonged to Sive. The hawk had somehow struggled away from the near mob around the dais and now came to my side, perhaps out of courtesy or perhaps to take advantage of the space that most serpents gave me, wary of the black magic falcons could wield. Sive would become the next avian queen, and though she was young still, she was too old to be called a child. Her Alastair, Prentice, hovered beside her, as protective as a mother hen. "Hi, how are you?" she asked me. She reached out and took my hand in greeting, betraying her frequent contact with the serpents. For a moment I could not answer because at Sive's touch I saw her, several years older, glowing with joy as she held her infant in her arms. The beloved queen presented her child to her people and said her name, Aleia. She handed the babe to her Alastair, and as their hands touched, I could feel the love that stretched between them. In contrast to the earlier visions I had had of Wyvern's court after its destruction and of Rosalind's tears, this one was comforting. You will be a beautiful queen," I said, still half within the vision. "Aleia, the name means given to us." Sive recoiled from me, breaking the trance. Thank you," she said, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I was glad she stopped me because I knew what I would have said next. "You are very much in love, but there is sorrow in your heart too. You remember the man who was your Alastair when you were a child. He often frustrated you, but you loved him despite his awkwardness. Prentice. Gone. To where?" Right then he came forward, guarding his pair bond from whatever threat he felt I projected. I started to reach out for the rest of the vision and barely managed to resist. Sive could rule peacefully with or without this man. I did not need to know when or how they would separate. I shook my head, backing away. "Excuse me," I said. "Are you all right?" Salokin put a hand on my arm, and that was enough to trigger another vision of Wyvern's court, this time in flames. I shuddered, pulling back mentally and physically, trying to fight the Sakri. There was too much going on in the market. In the language of Anmique, Eliza's abdication would be referred to as Shenile, a decision that drastically altered the path of fate. I had foolishly come here to see the present for myself, but was on the verge of being swamped by futures. I turned abruptly, not bothering to beg leave of the heir to the Tulithea or explain myself to the flautist. I needed to be somewhere quiet. If only I had not lost my falcon form long before, I could have grown my wings. Within minutes, I could have been beyond the bounds of Wyvern's court, beyond the influence of Anamirek's magic, and beyond the pulse of these visions. Instead, I walked, agonizingly slowly, step by weary step, back to the small house I kept at the edge of Wyvern's court, and there I collapsed into sleep. Chapter 3. Anmique, I have always been yours, your voice, your tool. Help me now, I beg you. Give me the strength to do what must be done today. The falcon Sharza whispered the prayer as she pushed open the doors of the temple. Araceli was deep in meditation and did not notice the intrusion, even as a shaft of sunlight fell across the altar, a simple black silk melos scarf draped across cold gray stone, with a single alabaster statue, the symbol of the god Anmique, on it. The rest of the room was equally stark, except for one corner where a 3-year-old child with fair hair slept upon a soft violet cushion. Araceli had found the girl abandoned in the jungle, far from the desert lands of their home, and had named her Alasdair, protector. Araceli, it is time. Keisha, the Cobra High Priestess of Anamirak, stood in the doorway to her temple, holding her head high despite her obvious exhaustion. Sharza remembered this woman as having mahogany hair, sun-touched skin, and brown eyes, but Anamirak's fire had dyed Keisha's body as surely as Anamik's ice had dyed Sharza's. Keisha's warm earthen eyes had become lakes of blood, and they were no longer kind but eerily piercing as she beheld Sharza, whose power had once been the opposite, the balance of hers. Many things had changed since Maeve had abandoned their coven. Once, they had been the protectors and leaders of their people, priests and priestesses of the 8 great powers, led by Maeve and kept in balance by her guidance. Now the powers were unbalanced. The stain left on Keisha's hair and eyes was nothing compared to the terror of the uncontrollable magics that had ripped through each of the Dasi in Maeve's absence. The serpents had blamed the falcons for the first assaults, saying that their worship of death and darkness had led to this destruction. Sharza's followers had retaliated, spitting their own accusations against the Chaos worshippers. "You say you wish to end this," the Cobra said to Sharza and Araceli in greeting. "Before more lives are lost," Araceli said. They had been fighting for years. What else could they do? Anamirak's domain was wildfire and war. As long as her magic was left unbalanced, there could never be peace. "Yes," Sharza whispered. She had seen the future, seen the final fire that would consume them all. She knew that this had to be stopped. "Come forward, child," she said. When Alasdair stepped out from behind Araceli and held up a curious hand, Keisha had knelt down and let the tiny fingers wrap around her thumb. "Yours?" she asked Araceli, her expression softening. "No," Araceli said, blinking back tears. "Brassel killed my daughter last night. Odd that it would be a priest of Namid, giver of life, who would destroy a child." The python had crept into Anmik's temple, probably hoping to kill Sharza. Instead, he had found Araceli and her young daughter. Araceli was convinced that he had killed the child intentionally. Sharza believed it had been an accident. Like all their powers, Brassel's magic had grown beyond his ability to control it. "Now," Sharza whispered, throwing out her own magic like a net. Araceli, Sifka, Servos, and Sharza had spent the past 3 years concocting this spell, and now it drove Keisha to her knees. The cobra screamed, and the child screamed as well. Oh gods, hearing that scream, Sharza wanted to leave this world. The spell the falcons had created shredded Keisha's magic, tearing it into 2. One half of Anamirak's power remained in the cobra, the other half burned its way into the child's soul. As it had painted Keisha garnet, so it stained the child, darkening her white blonde hair and pale eyes to the color of beaten gold. It was too late to bring back the balance, and no one could control Anamirak's chaos, but they hoped that this would cripple the serpent's magic before it could destroy even more. Araceli was the one who took the little girl's tiny hands in her own and whispered gently, "Now you'll be able to fly, like we can." "Don't be kind," Sharza said. "If you are kind, we will never be able to do what must be done." "Come, Alasdair," Araceli said, taking the young hawk's hand before Keisha could recover and realize what they had done. "You have much to learn before we take you back to your people." No, this wasn't me. This wasn't my time. All this had happened long before happened long before to Sharza, before she had raised the island from the sea and become Empress of the White City. I'd seen it before, the first time. I had screamed with Keisha, screamed for days until Sharza helped me escape the vision. Where was I? Oh, there. Even generations later, the Cobrianas' garnet eyes had not faded. As Anjay rode in a fury to the Hawk's Keep, they burned with the same intensity that had made Sharza cringe when she had faced Keisha in the temple of Anamirak. Some of Anjay's soldiers had followed him, and they fell by the dozens as he thrust forward into avian lands, but no bow or blade seemed to be able to pierce his pain and hatred. The cobra had returned from Falcon Lands only hours before. He knew nothing of the child he had sired, and if he had been lingering on recollections of the falcon lover he had left behind, those had been shoved aside by the news of his sister's assassination. Anjay did not dismount as he reached the courtyard of the Hawk's Keep, but boosted himself up to stand on his horse's back. A raven tried to stop him from grasping the balcony floor above, and Anjay quickly drove a blade into the man's ribs. As Anjay hoisted himself over the balcony rail, a young hawk girl shrieked the raven's name with enough pain in her voice that Anjay knew that the man he had just killed had been her mate. Fine. He would end this hawk's pain too, as her people had ended the lives of so many he loved. All the while, the falcon Darien shadowed him, and she let out a cry that echoed the girl's as the youngest avian prince defended his sister Danica by driving a soldier's blade into Anjay's back. The avians had lost scores of their own people to this mad rush, and now they cheered as a serpent's blood flowed over the child's hand. No. Why was I forced to watch this again and again every time I closed my eyes? I shared Anjay's blood. Did I need to share his death? And now, finally, I remembered who I was, the unwanted child of a doomed cobra prince, and a falcon sworn to the Empress Yarza, who had ripped Anamirak's magic in half. Had the avians and the serpient known, all those years as they had warred, that they had slain the other halves of themselves? Was that why peace came with such difficulty? Not because they hated each other, but because they could not forgive themselves? I was a young child, dancing the skies above the white city, lost in the endless tides of magic that whirled through this land like storm winds. The wings I spread showed the taint of my father's blood, the color of tar and lava, Anamirak's stain. My father's magic was not powerful. A cobra did not have enough power on his own to be a danger. But when what remained of Anamirak's magic needled the falcon magic I had inherited from my mother, Anmeek slashed back. I spent most of my days struggling to control these combinative powers, but in the middle of this sky dance, I lost that battle. The two magics fought, tearing and slicing, ripping at my body and my wings. Dark flight feathers cascaded to the ground even before I fell screaming. Sharza caught me before the crystal-hard ground shattered my plummeting body, but though she mended my flesh, she could do nothing with my ravaged wings. As for the rest of me, the agony from my magic was as deep as my blood, and even my empress could not heal that. She cradled me in her arms as I shivered and cried, my magic striking her blindly no matter how I tried to keep it in check. Sleep now, she whispered to me. It was all she could do. Yes, I would have liked to sleep, to rest, to finally be away from the sharp edges left behind by that ancient rending. But I had made a promise. I needed to find my way back to here, and now, in Wyvern's Court. Such a strange and unlikely place. The two halves of Anamirak were trying to shove themselves together, but it was like trying to return blood to a wound. Back to Wyvern's Court. Salem Cobriana, the heir to the Serpient throne, lay in my arms dying. His blood felt cold on my skin. His red eyes had turned to tawny brown. His heartbeat was so faint that even with my cheek pressed to his chest, I could barely hear it. I knew I could save him. I had that power. Always had. I could use my magic, patch his bones, slow the bleeding, force his heart to beat and his lungs to stir the air. But terror gripped me. I could ask my magic for that much, and Anmeek would grant me the favor. But the White Falcon's power ultimately came from the void, from Ekel, and that dark goddess would ask even more in return. If I swam her dark, still waters, I would drown. I shrieked for help, but none came. The mob was seething. How had the crowd turned so vile so quickly? An arrow pierced my back, slicing under my left shoulder blade. I covered Salem with my body, but did not reach out to him with the greedy magic that could save his life. I couldn't. Please. Another arrow sliced through my arm before burying itself in his side. Hi! Someone shouted my name. At that moment I felt Salem die, felt the last spark go out as Brish, goddess of death, claimed her own. No, not her own. This wasn't natural. This was a travesty. I screamed and then let the magic free, lashing into the crowd. Hi! Shmanlik lahai, kishara lahai. Pain, fear, not from me or from Salem, but from someone else, someone who knew all my names. Stay here, hi, stay here with me. Only one person ever called me by both sides of my blood, Nisias. He named me Shmanlik, a falcon, and Kishara, a cobra. I wanted the serpent throne no more than Nisias wanted his throne on Anmik. We would never claim our royal birthrights, but our magics would forever tie us to them. The words, his bond to me and mine to him, drew me back to the real world. Whew. Well, that was a vision roller coaster. Let's see. All right. Chapter 4. I lifted my head in the place and time most call reality, in the bedroom of my little home at the edge of Wyvern's Court, and found Nisias standing across the room from me, one arm held protectively in front of his face. His forearm was bleeding in 4 places, as if scratched by the claws of some great cat. I could see a dark stain on his shirt where his chest had been similarly torn. A cloud of angry magic, my magic, which I had lashed out with during my unwanted visions, stormed around him. I curled into a ball, trying to draw the magic back from Nisias into myself, and knowing that I might have killed anyone else who had woken me. I shut my eyes for a moment and again heard the whisper of Ekel, who for so long had been my keeper, my guardian, my kingdom, my ever-jealous lover. Her voice was soothing, and I felt myself falling back into sleep. Nisias touched my arm, terribly trusting, even with blood trickling down his skin. Hi, stay with me. Quemak, I said. He had called me a falcon and a cobra, but I was neither, really. Opal was right. Quemak, mongrel. That was the only title I could claim. Nisias winced when I said it. The word was not a polite one, and I knew he hated to hear me apply it to myself, but how could he argue? We both knew it was true. You're hurting yourself, he said. The magic I had been trying to pull away from him had cut into my own arms instead. I didn't mind the pain much. I was nearly numb to it, but I hated to see blood on his skin. He gently ran his hands down my arms. I shivered, both at his touch and at the brush of his magic, which felt like cold water in the scalding desert. He smoothed the cuts I had created, transforming them into something harmless that quickly faded. I doubted that Nisias could explain how he had done it. He had begun to study his falcon magic only within the last few months, but he was royal blood, so his power responded freely to his desires. Simple things like this he could do instinctively. Nightmare? Nisias asked as he healed us both. How I envied people who dreamed, who could have nightmares and know that in no world they were real. Sakri. Nisias resented anything resembling prophecy. He had not been raised with the assumption that if one was strong enough, one could look forward in time and see what fate had planned. Not every Sakri Ashe, vision of the future, came true, but every one had the potential to do so. Few people had the power to weave such Sakri, and among those who could, even fewer had the strength to recall them. I was one of the few, but even I had trouble sometimes. I would remember single images or driving desires instead of whole scenes. Most of the time I let the future memories fade. But this time something had caused me to wake screaming and struggling. I had seen my father killed. No, I saw that frequently, almost every time I slept. It no longer had the power to... Salem. His was the death that had disturbed me. The memory of it made me shudder. I could almost taste the helpless terror and fury I felt in the vision. Almost. The emotions were already fading. returning me to my more familiar state of numbness. But surely in the future I had envisioned, I had felt like I was losing something far more dear than one cobra's life. Why? I had once given myself to Ekel to rid myself of these kinds of visions, which were rich with emotions, most often painful ones, that had no parallel in my everyday existence. Now I had taken myself back to reality and was trying to live again. Would this be my punishment, to have this cobra die in my arms while I wept? Would I die with him? Will I be the cause of his death? I wondered. What did you see? Nisias asked, drawing me from my dark thoughts. I shook my head. I couldn't speak of it. Describing such prophecies made them more real, and as I had recently experienced with Eliza, sometimes that was enough to set one into motion. It doesn't matter. It will fade, I said. At least, I prayed it would. Nisias sighed and ran his hands through his pale blonde hair, which was hanging loose around his face. The blue strands were tangled with all the rest, and I wished I could reach forward and separate them, binding the golden locks back, the way they would be worn on Anmeek. Old habit, left over from years in the White City when I had prayed and wished I could have the pale, pale blonde hair of my empress, marked with a falcon's blue, instead of the black hair of a cobra. Or perhaps it was a desired habit. Every time Nisias was near, I found myself inventing excuses to touch him. I kept my hands at my sides, though. I can't stay long, Nisias said apologetically. The court is... Dear skies, you weren't even there. I heard, I said. Eliza has given up the throne. Nisias nodded. Salem and Sive will inherit the Serpient and Avian thrones. Neither of them hates the other. Hopefully, they would be able to maintain the peace between the Avians and the Serpient and bring the two worlds together so that someday a Wyvern queen might be able to rule. Hopefully, the slaughter that had lasted more than 1,000 years would never begin again. What will Eliza do now? She has taken a wolf for her mate, he said, a woman named Betia. They left Wyvern's court as soon as Eliza made the announcement. It had been obvious to me from the beginning that Eliza loved the wolf. Even so, I nodded, accepting the information as if it was new. Fate did care for its children sometimes. Long before, Araceli and Sharza had split Anamirak's magic to protect this world. In Eliza, daughter of a hawk and a cobra, that magic had again combined. Love, that would never let Eliza breed, was a gift, as any natural-born child of the Wyverns would unleash terror on this earth. Salem plans to formally name his mate tomorrow night, Nisias said. He believes it will comfort his people if he takes the Serpient throne quickly, so they do not need to wonder if he will also step aside. I'm not sure I agree with his reasoning, but... He shook his head. Salem will be king, and once that is done, it will be harder for Eliza to return if she wants to. I think Salem would step aside if she tried, but a king cannot give up his crown as easily as an heir can give up her birthright. He let out a frustrated sound. I don't like this. Eliza has gone off and asked none of her guard to follow her. Salem's mother is still exploring somewhere, and though we've sent dozens of messengers for Irene, there is no guarantee they will find her. We've spent most of the last 2 months trying to control riots in the marketplace, and now, with Eliza gone, it is going to be even harder. It isn't a good time for the royal house to be so scattered. Nisias shook his head again. I'm sorry. I don't mean to burden you with this. Nisias usually tried to shelter me from what he perceived as the more difficult aspects of this reality, as if any bad news might send me back into Ekel. Perhaps someday it would, but not right now. I attempted to find something to say that would encourage him to continue the conversation. She and some wolf have run off in the woods together, leaving Salem and Sive holding the bag, Gren had said. Since Eliza's mate did not care for other wolves, they could be with only one group, the Obsidian Guild. The guild, which included Maeve's descendants, was shunned equally by Serpient and Falcons. Though they had been pardoned by the Cobriana 2 generations before, very few of them had elected to rejoin Serpient society. Eliza is safe, I assured Nisias. The leader of the Obsidian Guild had introduced himself to me within days of my waking in Wyvern's court. He was another of my late father's devotees, and he had made it clear that I was always welcome in the Obsidian camp. Though only a child when Anjay had died, the White Viper spoke highly of the long-dead cobra, and had even implied that once the outlaw guild might have returned to ally with the rest of the Serpient if my father had survived to rule. I would not call him a friend, but I was familiar with his ways. He would not allow a traveling dancer to be threatened in his land. I know where she was heading, and you don't need to worry about her there. Nisias and I never spoke the word obsidian between us, but I sensed he knew both of my connection with that guild and of Eliza's. My neglecting to give specifics now was enough to tell him who Eliza was with. She will always be my queen, and I will always protect her as long as she will allow me to, Nisias said. I know she doesn't want a guard loitering around her, but it would make me, and the rest of her guards, not to mention her family, feel worlds better if I could see for myself that she is safely settled. I shook my head. You wouldn't be welcome. A glimpse of a royal guard would make the entire guild disappear. No, of course not. You're right. You need to stay in court anyway, I said. Then, noticing his troubled expression, I added, if you would like, I can check on the wyvern. Thank you. You don't know how much it would mean to me. Yes, I do, I thought. I need to go, Nisias said. I shouldn't have stayed even this long. I sent him a silent query by magic instead of voice. At his sharp look, I repeated myself out loud. Why did you come here? I felt you scream. His voice was soft. But why come to my side? I asked silently. Why do you do all this for me when you know I am only a danger to you, a mongrel falcon in your world of serpents and avians? He ignored my silent words, as he always did. I knew he heard me, but he would only acknowledge my questions if I pronounced them. Thank you, I said instead. Will you be all right? I will be fine, I answered. I shan't dissolve away, and I will bring back news of your queen. He kissed my cheek. Take care of yourself, Hai. Teska kaya gala. He gave me a curious look when I used the endearment, which meant my light. He knew he was. My vow to him was what kept me in this world, kept me from the numbing darkness of Echo. Ohena somala lo mehe, he replied. Literally, the title meant sister of my soul, though like most of the language, it had many different connotations. Some were fraternal, others were more loving, closer to soulmate. He did not explain what he meant any more than I had explained what I'd said. Instead, he went back to Wyvern's court to continue his exhausting struggle against the future, a future he still believed he could control, though I feared we might all soon drown. All right. Well, that will bring us to a conclusion for our reading this evening. Thank you all so much for joining me today on this makeup reading day. For anybody who's watching me live on TikTok, thank you so very much. I will see you back on Monday. Right? Yes. Monday we'll resume our normal time. So 8 to 9 on Monday for our next reading of Wyvernhail. And for anyone watching on YouTube, which will be a little bit later, thank you so much for following me on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching these videos and interacting with them. Feel free. So, obviously now that you guys know when we do these readings, feel free to pop on TikTok and watch these live if you want. I know probably for a lot of people it's more convenient to just, be able to watch them later, depending on your schedules. But if you ever get the chance to, pop onto TikTok and when I'm doing these lives, I will be more than happy to give a shout out to you. If you say, hey, I normally watch you on YouTube, but I'm here watching you tonight, I would be like, hey, what's up, my YouTube family? So again, thank you guys so much for joining me this evening. Stay hydrated, stay safe. Please, stay safe if you have to be out on the roads tomorrow. I'm sure most places everywhere right now are probably going to be pretty clear, but there's going to be ice. It's going to be a little bit slick, so just be careful. And I think we're actually supposed to get some more weather Thursday night. I think. So just brace yourselves for another round of winter weather, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.